In 1945, a city lay in ruins. Berlin was a field of broken stone and burned walls. Soldiers walked through streets that no longer had names. Families dug through rubble, searching for relatives who might still be alive underneath. Germany had lost a war, but it had lost something far deeper than that. In 1945, Germany did not just lose a war. It lost the image of itself. The country was cut into 4 pieces by the armies that had defeated it. Its leaders were dead or in chains. Its cities were ash. And the world had just learned the full truth about the crimes committed in its name. Crimes so dark that some refused to believe them at first. How does a nation rise again after falling this far? And what happens when it has to rise not once, but twice, in less than 100 years? This is the story of Germany, a nation built by ambition, broken by its own choices, and rebuilt by something far harder to find than power. For centuries, there was no single Germany. The land where German was spoken held dozens of kingdoms, duchies, and free cities, each with its own ruler and its own laws. People shared a language, songs, and stories. They did not share one nation. By the early 1800s, after the storm of the Napoleonic Wars had passed, these lands settled into a loose group of 39 separate states. They were neighbors on a map, not citizens of one country. Many Germans dreamed of unity. Almost none of them agreed on how to build it. Then one man decided to stop dreaming and start forcing the answer. His name was Otto von Bismarck, the chief minister of Prussia, the strongest and best organized of the German states. Bismarck did not believe in long speeches or patient compromise. He believed in careful, hard planning. He once told a parliament that the great questions of the age would not be settled by votes or speeches, but by iron and blood. Yet Bismarck was never only a man of war. He was, above all, a master of diplomacy, the careful work of dealing with other countries. He studied his rivals carefully, left them without friends or allies, formed alliances when they served him, and broke them the moment they did not. He used war only when he was almost certain he would win, and only as one tool among many. Piece by piece, through careful politics and 3 short wars that changed everything, Bismarck pulled the scattered German states together under Prussian leadership. In 1871, inside the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, France, Wilhelm I, King of Prussia, was proclaimed German Emperor. Bismarck stood behind that moment as its architect, the man who had built the empire now being declared. For the first time, a modern German nation existed as one country. The new German Empire grew fast, faster than almost anyone in Europe expected. Factories rose across the country in a single generation, and railways connected cities that had once been strangers to each other. German universities became centers of science, and German steel built bridges, ships, and weapons at a speed no one had seen before. Within 30 years, Germany had become one of the strongest powers in Europe. Its army was feared by its neighbors, and its navy grew large enough to challenge Britain's command of the seas. But this new strength entered a continent that was already full of tension. Older empires watched the rise of this young, ambitious nation with growing nervousness. Alliances locked countries together, like dominoes, standing in a row, each one ready to fall against the next. Nationalism burned hot from Paris to Vienna to St. Petersburg. Germany's ambition was only one spark among many, but it was a spark thrown into a room already filled with smoke. In the summer of 1914, a single assassination in the Balkans lit that fire. Germany stood beside its ally, Austria-Hungary. Within weeks, the dominoes began to fall, one after another. The First World War had begun. For 4 long years, Germany fought on multiple fronts, sending a generation of young men into trenches, barbed wire, and machine gun fire. The empire's strength, the very thing that had made it so proud, was now being burned away in the mud of northern France and the forests of the east. In 1918, exhausted and starving, Germany surrendered. The Kaiser fled into exile across the border. The empire that had been born in a hall of mirrors collapsed in defeat and disorder. The peace treaty that followed, signed at Versailles in 1919, demanded heavy payments, took away German territory, and shrank its army down to a small fraction of its former size. For many Germans, the treaty did not feel like peace. It felt like punishment and like a wound that had been left open on purpose. Germany had fallen, and the way it would choose to rise again would shape the rest of the century, for itself and for the world. After the war, Germany became a republic for the first time, with its new constitution written in the quiet city of Weimar. It had elections. It had a free press. It had, on paper, one of the most modern democracies in the world. But a young democracy cannot survive on paper alone, especially one born from defeat. In 1923, the German currency collapsed completely. Prices doubled within days, then within hours. People carried wheelbarrows full of paper money just to buy a loaf of bread. Savings that had taken a lifetime to build became worthless almost overnight. The economy slowly recovered through the rest of the decade. But the wound this crisis left behind never fully closed. Then, in 1929, a financial crash on the other side of the Atlantic spread across the world like a shadow. The Great Depression reached Germany like a second blow to a body that had barely healed from the first. Factories closed their doors. Millions of workers lost their jobs in a matter of months. Families who had already survived hyperinflation now faced hunger, unemployment, and a growing sense that democracy itself had failed them. Germany had fallen before. And the first time it tried to rise, it chose anger. Into this anger stepped a failed former soldier, a man once rejected from art school, a loud and furious speaker who finally found a stage in the chaos around him. His name was Adolf Hitler. He did not offer careful policy or patient solutions. He offered something far more dangerous: blame, wounded pride, and the promise of revenge. He told a desperate, humiliated nation that its suffering was someone else's fault and that Germany could rise again bigger, stronger, and feared by every other nation on earth. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor by President Hindenburg through a legal process inside Germany's own constitution. Within months, the institutions of democracy were taken apart from the inside, one law at a time, until almost nothing remained. Under Hitler, Germany built up its army again at incredible speed. New roads stretched across the country. Factories multiplied. Unemployment fell sharply. To many ordinary Germans watching from outside the halls of power, this looked very much like recovery, even like a kind of miracle. But behind the new roads and the falling unemployment numbers, much of this recovery was rearmament preparation for a war already being planned, hidden behind propaganda that controlled what ordinary citizens were allowed to see and believe. And underneath all of it lay a foundation of hatred, a foundation that was already cracking the ground beneath it. The Nazi government built its new state around a brutal idea that some human lives mattered and others did not. Jewish citizens lost their rights, their jobs, their property, and their safety, long before the first shots of a new war were ever fired. Laws were passed to isolate them. Businesses were taken away. Neighbors, who had lived side by side for generations, were turned into strangers, then targets. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. Nazi armies swept across Europe with terrifying speed through Poland, through France, through one capital city after another. For a brief moment, German military power reached its highest point in modern history. But this was never a peak worth admiring. It was the edge of disaster. Behind the front lines, the Nazi state was carrying out a very different kind of war, a planned, industrial campaign of murder. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were killed in what the world now calls the Holocaust. Millions of others, Roma people, disabled people, political prisoners, and many more who did not fit the regime's idea of who deserved to live, were murdered alongside them. Shot in mass killings, starved and worked to death in crowded ghettos and labor camps, or killed in camps built for exactly that purpose. This was not a small detail in Germany's story, mentioned and quickly forgotten. This was the moral center of its fall, proof that power without right and wrong can become the deepest kind of darkness a nation can fall into. By 1945, the war Germany itself had started was tearing the country apart from every direction. Soviet, American, British, and French armies closed in from east and west at the same time. Berlin fell after days of fierce fighting in its own streets, building by building. Hitler died by his own hand in a bunker beneath the ruins of the capital he had once promised to make eternal. Germany did not just lose the war. It now had to face, in front of the entire world, exactly what it had done in the name of victory. After 1945, Germany lay occupied, exhausted, and divided among the victors who had defeated it. In 1949, this division became official. West Germany formed a new democratic state, supported by the United States, Britain, and France. East Germany became a communist state, controlled by Soviet influence. One nation, one language, one shared history, now split into two very different worlds. In 1961, the division turned into a physical wall. The Berlin Wall cut straight through the heart of Berlin, separating families, friends, and entire neighborhoods almost overnight. People woke up one morning to find they could no longer cross the street to see their own relatives. In the West, a new kind of Germany took shape, built on democracy and partnership with the very nations it had once fought. In the East, people lived under strict government control, with little freedom to speak or travel. But West Germany's rebirth was never only about factories and economic growth. It was, just as importantly, a moral rebirth. Unlike many nations that prefer to look away from their darkest chapters, post-war Germany began slowly, painfully, and not without resistance from its own people, to look directly at its own history. Over decades, this honesty became a national habit. Schools taught the Holocaust in honest, painful detail, without excuses and without softening the truth. Memorials were built in the very heart of Berlin, not hidden quietly at its edges. In 1970, the West German Chancellor, Willy Brandt, traveled to Warsaw and knelt in silence before a monument to the victims of the Nazi regime, a single quiet gesture that spoke louder than any speech ever could. In 1989, after decades of division, the Berlin Wall finally fell. Crowds climbed up onto it, danced along its length, and tore pieces of it down with their bare hands, under bright television lights watched by the entire world. In 1990, East and West Germany became one country again, for the first time in over 40 years. Germany rose from the ashes again. But this time, it did not look for glory in conquest or revenge. It found its strength in memory, responsibility, and democracy. Today, Germany stands as one of the strongest democracies in Europe, not because it never fell, but because of how it eventually chose to rise. The first time, it tried to rise through power, wounded pride, and the promise of revenge. That path led to the deepest catastrophe in its entire history. The second time, it rose through something far harder to build than any army or any empire: honesty about its own past. A nation, in the end, is not measured only by how high it can climb. It is measured by how it faces what made it fall. Germany rose from the ashes, but this time, it chose a different way. If this story taught you something new about Germany or about English, subscribe to EraSpeak and join us for the next chapter in history.